in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week, it's going to be the turn of the writer and presenter Robert Wringham, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. Has done many things, but has just also been involved in a film that has just coming out, or is about to come out, titled Melt It, the film The Iceman, which is about Anthony Irvine, who in the 1980s and 90s basically had an act where he took a block of ice on stage and tried to melt it. And they made a film about it, which is fantastic. So I'll put a link in the notes below so you'll be able to find out more information. But this is the interview with Robert, so after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of the early formative years. Robert, it's over to you.
So I was born in 82, so I'm a little bit younger. And the music scene when I was growing up wasn't particularly great. It was kind of indie rock was kind of the main thing that my peers were into. And, I'd sort of go along with it. I remember sort of doing karaoke to things like Stereophonics. That was a lot of fun.
Right.
But it was never really my jam. I think I always knew that it was all a bit sad. And I could kind of tell what was going to be remembered. You know, Britpop was, I don't want to say it was before my time, but I was kind of 14 when the Oasis and Blur wars was happening.
Yes.
I kind of knew that things like Blur and Elastica and Oasis, they'd all be remembered very well. But I kind of always had the sense that the long tail of that, which was indie rock, Phonics, Travis, I kind of knew that wasn't the music that was going to last. I was kind of aware of that at the time. So although it was a lot of fun, I remember liking the Blue Tones quite a lot.
Right, yes.
But I kind of always felt like this isn't really a great moment to be growing up in. So my music interest really expanded out, and I became interested in jazz, and that's the thing that persists to this day. So
Right.
the early jazz awakening was, was the classic stuff, 1960s, bebop to cool, we're talking sort of Miles Davis and things like that, the sacred texts. But then as I got older, I got a little more niche into that kind of thing. And I think that is ultimately what brought me into comedy and what shaped my interests in comedy. I think I had a natural inclination to dig a bit deeper because of this experience of what mainstream music looked like when I was growing up. And so straight away it was, Vic and Bob won't quite be my thing, although I do like them on TV, but I'll look for kind of the real Vic and Bob. And that's what kind of got me into things like Club Zarathustra, which we can talk about in a bit more detail later on if you'd like to.
Yeah, definitely.
That's kind of the cultural background. I don't want to say it was a cultural vacuum. I almost said that accidentally. It wasn't that bad. But kind of the mainstream of the 90s when I was growing up, it wasn't tremendously exciting. And I think I kind of got the sense of that. I could tell from the way my dad would talk about, things he was into as a younger man, Roxy Music, David Bowie, Captain Beefheart, Frank Zappa. Even saying those names now, I get a bit of a thrill because it was all stuff that was just before my time. And then that kind of happened with comedy as well. The instinct was to dig back. Let's see what the more mature people were into. I don't know why. None of my peers were. I remember a really embarrassing moment in an IT class at high school when it was an exercise in learning how to use a database, and we all did a questionnaire, and it was favorite music, and I was like, well, John Coltrane, but everybody else putting, I don't know, whatever pop nonsense was the thing at the time. I can't even remember, but I remember feeling pretty cowed by that, thinking, oh dear, yeah, this is what my life is going to be like.
Yes, it's going to be Norman No Mates on that stage, aren't you, really? This is not going to be a
Thank God for the internet is all I can say about that, really, is because, after a certain point, you do start to connect with people who share the same interests. And,
yes.
And I don't know how very young people do it now. Growing up, MySpace and Friendster and Facebook eventually appeared, and LiveJournal, and that was all indexed by interests. So you could click Frank Zappa and go to your locale and say, okay, well, I live in Birmingham, I like Frank Zappa. You'll meet other people in Birmingham who like Frank Zappa. So you could find other people who just shared your interest. And it was kind of okay if the age difference was there as well. That kind of wasn't a problem.
Yes.
So thank God for the internet for connecting and meeting all these interesting people.
Yeah, it's always under curiosity because when I was growing up in that sort of the mid 70s, I was a bit, I was very thought my older brother, who was 7 years older, was very cool and groovy. He was really into prog rock. I had no idea that he could have given me punk, but he gave me prog, and I sort of would sneak into his room and listen to all these records and find them really fascinating.
I think
But and definitely punk was a no-no. Except the 7-inch singles a no-no as well. It had to be 12 inch. It had to be the whole double sort of vinyl record, gatefold sleeve with a Roger Dean sort of artwork, and it was all very conceptual and so completely uncool. But when you're young and you're sneaking in and listening to these records, which I wasn't listening to or watching the Old Grey Whistle Test, and culturally it was like, oh, this is quite fascinating. He also had Goodbye Yellow Brick Road and Sergeant Pepper as well. And at that time, I sort of thought actually those records had got no cultural context either. They were just there doing their things. And the Beatles had only just broken up, which felt like it was only about 4 years ago, but it would have been like the mid 70s, 74, 75. And you're thinking, but it did seem like a whole different world. They were just the old men who'd had their moment. You think, God, they were just so young. But then they just all looked a bit beady and mature, really. And then indie pop came along in the 80s, and that was when I got really obsessed about the alternative scene in that slightly. I wasn't self-conscious, but it was like, oh, I can relate to this because I didn't do nightclubs and I had no idea how to even dance properly. So I felt very intimidated in that scene. But I was very excited with the Smiths, and then just John Peel and everything else that went with it. You bought the package, really. The Jim Jarmusch movies, Betty Blue, Diva, The Wings of
Yes.
Desire, everything that's angsty, and then Red Wedge and the Socialist Workers' Party, TVP, which is a type of food, by the way. But you just became vegetarian, off you went. That was it, really.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't a club kid either, but actually looking back on it, it's one of the more interesting innovations in music and culture. That kind of, again, I was a little bit too young for it, but in terms of my lifespan, that's kind of one of the more interesting things that has happened was 90s club and ecstasy and Ibiza, that kind of culture. That
Yes.
seems, looking back, as it kind of looks like one of the more interesting peaks of culture that I'm sure people are writing about it now. This is something I need to kind of do a deep dive on and try to unbox these things that I just about bore witness to but didn't really understand because I was just a bit too young.
Yeah, there's quite a few. There was because there was Castle Morton, and then there was a few people who've written books on. I think there's one on the Spiral Tribe, and another book which was about the Nottingham sound system people, which I did get. I have got somewhere, and it is kind of interesting because again, it was that time where there was a huge amount. I think the thing that happened in the 80s, which was very lucky in a weird way, was that there was Thatcher, there was like the Falkland War and the miners' crisis, and then Greenham Common. But there was a huge amount of unemployment. But the benefit system was very, very good for anybody who wanted to not work, which seemed to be an awful lot of the population, especially left of centre. So you had the Job Seekers Allowance and Enterprise Allowance schemes, but also you got your rent paid and council tax. So basically, for 38 or £40 a week dole money, you kind of could live, as long as you enjoyed going to happy hour at the pub because you had no other thing to do at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It
Yeah.
was, fill your boots, really. And then so you had the gatekeepers like John Peel, and then you had the NME, Melody Maker, and Sounds. But then every arts centre in the country would have an alternative evening or night, wouldn't they? Mostly on a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. And for £2.50, you could go and see three bands who then you look back and think, oh my God, they were all really good. I just took it for granted. So
Looking back, that was real halcyon days, wasn't it? It's kind of a miracle, really.
yes, it was. And then obviously the alternative comedy scene was starting to blossom, which was very exciting. So just briefly then, so you grew up in the 90s. It finishes brilliantly with Woodstock 99 when everyone goes mental and starts burning things. And you had Marilyn Manson and Limp Bizkit, all the classics, Red Hot Chili Peppers. I mean, all deep and meaningful bands that we'll love so much. So what happens in your O years onwards?
I'm sorry, I'm really laughing at the ones you've chosen. Yeah. So That was I kind of missed the question.
So the 90s, you would have been 18 when it, Woodstock 99,
Yeah.
and it was like, it started with Kurt Cobain being very sensitive about, feminism and stuff, and it ended up with, I don't know, almost rape and pillage in sort of within
Yeah.
one decade, didn't it? But the party definitely finished after that. I think there was 2 women on the bill who fled for their lives, and everyone else just got wrecked, didn't they? But
It was a very complacent sort of edgelord culture in comedy. So unfortunately, I still find it quite funny. It's kind of gone now, but I still like things like South Park, where they're all being a little bit edgy and a bit cheeky. And I do kind of miss that cheekiness, like we shouldn't really be saying this, but we're going to say it anyway, and that's naughty. But looking back, it was complacent. It was white male comedians who were doing that kind of humor. And I'll always love them, but it wasn't right, and it did have to diversify. And the comedy scene is much, much better for it. So, sort of turn of the millennium, when I was 18, and that was when I would start going to comedy clubs and whatnot, there'd be one woman on the bill, and it was almost like that woman almost represents a genre, more than diversity. It's like, we'll have we'll have like a white guy, a double act, an ethnic minority, and a woman. It was kind of as diverse as it got.
Yes.
Whereas now, I could be wrong, but I don't think MCs and people who curate these nights now are quite thinking in those terms, because actually, if you just dip a jar into the water of comedy now, that's what you'll get, because it is a lot more representative of the wider world. You will get different voices, different ideas, different takes. And of course, that's the whole point of comedy. He's getting these different takes, and it's those clashes of culture. It's like two particles in the Large Hadron Collider colliding and releasing colossal energy. That's what you want. That's the entire point of it. So the more diverse it's got, the better and more interesting and more finessed comedy has become, really. So it's all to the good. So although I do have some nostalgia looking back at the naughty comedy, literally, the comedy of the new millennium, it's good that it's over, really. And so many things have changed. I mean, that the smoking ban has changed so much. So people forget that. But I remember very clearly, I live in Glasgow, and Daniel Kitson was coming to town, and he has asthma, so he requested that nobody smoke in the club. And the complaining that people were, it's like, oh my God, who does he think he is, trying to control the audience, can't have a smoke in the comedy club, it's crazy. But the thing is, the ban was only a year away. We kind of knew it was coming, so, you better get used to it. But the kind of scuzziness of the comedy nights has all gone. So heckling and that kind of thing, it's all really gone. If you go to a proper comedy club now, like the Stand here in Glasgow, there'll be all notices up about no heckling, don't use your phone, you will be asked to leave. But in those days, it was really bear pit stuff. It was expected that people would shout out, people would be blind drunk. You can't get blind drunk anymore because it's too expensive.
Right.
So people are more sober. We're asked not to heckle. There's no smoke in the room, so you don't go home stinking. The whole thing is much more civil. Again, it's one of those things I'm nostalgic about, because as a young man, these nights were electric. I was trying to tell people about, there was a wonderful comic who we mentioned briefly in the film, Chris Lynham.
Oh, yes. Is he the firework man?
Yes, the firework man. But you know what? I had to see him 6 times before I saw the firework. So I think a lot of people no, they don't write him off, but they remember him as the firecracker bomb.
Well, I went to Edinburgh Festival. Well, I must have gone with friends in about 1990, and I saw him, and
Did he do it?
Yeah, he did it, actually. I think it felt like the build-up was to do with the firework. I mean...
Well, I think, because it'd make people sing as well. The audience had to sing "There's no business like show business" as he lit the firecracker.
Yes.
But the thing I remember about him best was to establish his dominance as soon as he came onto stage. He pulled the shoe off the man on the front row and just banged it to the back of the room, just threw it over arm, and it just banged against the fire escape at the back of the room, made a huge noise, and everybody was sort of cowed into... oof, what are we going to do with this? But that was the days when it would be the other way around. The audience were kind of baying for blood, he wasn't taking any of that shit. So he'd make this big, bold, aggressive statement to begin with. And Lord, it was so much fun. So as I'm saying, things are better now, but there is a part of me that misses that.
Yes, because I think it was around the same time that Jerry Sadovich, because I saw him a few times, and there
Yeah.
was like the feminists and him just having this argument. It was really unpleasant, actually. I don't know if there was any comedy. He'd say something really offensive, and then the feminists, which is fair enough, kind of pulled him up, and then it just became a debate in society. I must admit, it was like you didn't go to have fun; you just went to feel quite uptight and tense, and it was horrendous, really, looking
It was
back on it.
toxic nights,
It
toxic
was
nights.
it was a bit, yeah, it was like at that point, it's not, yeah, I don't know, it was a bit strange. But then I did see people like Jack D at that stage, and then there was he was just started, and there was Joe Brand, and then Eddie Izzard and Julian Clary were all coming through at that point, I think, from memory.
He tended to pendulum though between kind of the more laddish end of the spectrum and then the more sort of geeky end of the spectrum, and the kind of geekier crowd were just a bit nicer. And I think actually over time they've kind of prevailed. So I remember in the mid-noughties we had Robin Ince's book club. That was
Right.
fantastic. It was it was bookish people doing comedy, and they weren't going to pick on you. They'd do crowd work. They'd come and talk to the audience and ask questions, but they're not going to pick on you or make you look small or stupid. So there really was like a new kind of kindness coming in. So acts like Robin himself, Josie Long, a guy called Asher Trelevin, who I still to this day think is wonderful. There was just this kind of kindness behind it, and again a nicheness. So a lot of the kind of C86 mixtape, compilation tape mentality was kind of there. Like I remember them playing this music. Oh, they had an opera singer as well, which was kind of amazing. She'd do funny opera. And that was very liberating. So if you were a bit of a, cardigan wearing boy like I was, this sort of thing was a bit, this was more my jam. Again,
Yes.
I love the Toxic Nights, and I look back on them fondly, and because they were exciting. But I don't think I'd thrive as a performer anyway if things were still like that.
Yeah. Do you find though with comedy, this is the thing that slightly spoils it, is the audience sometimes can just be laughing hysterically at things that you think that you just feel like it wasn't that great, just smile, it's like, and they're rocking and they're looking at each other and then repeating the line that the person just said. You think, and I find sometimes the audience is quite off-putting, actually. I just wish they wouldn't, it's like, yes, I did hear it because I'm listening, mate, but thanks for repeating the last line and laughing in your friend's face. I mean, do you find that a little bit trying at times, or am I just very uptight?
No, I do. If I go to see, especially the more corporate end of comedy, I'm not going to name anything, but if you see something that kind of has that mainstream sensibility, it's literally the way they talk. It's not anything they've said. It's not the idea. It's not the intellectual content. It's just da 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 da, and the audience are triggered into going, "Oh, that's the joke," and then they just laugh because after all, that is what they've come for. That was something I learned very, very early on. The first time I ever did stand-up, I was nervous, and I actually crept out of my house because I didn't want my flatmate being there. I had to sort of lie about where I was going, so I did my 10 minutes. But there was some graffiti in the green room, and it was a sort of scary-looking man, a bit like a kind of Ralph Steadman-looking ugly man.
Oh,
And
yes.
he was saying, "They're going to hate you," and it just really made me laugh because in that I knew what that graffiti meant. They're not going to hate you. That's just a joke. It's people are going there to laugh, and they want to love you. And actually, you've got to be pretty bad for people to hate you. So this is the great secret, really. As long as you act confident and you sort of meet that social contract of, they are there to be entertained, and you're the person who's going to do it. You'll just get along, and everybody will laugh. So once you know that, that's when you can start mucking around and testing it and that sort of thing, which is how you get
Yes.
to Club Zarathustra and the kind of comedy I'd like to talk about perhaps today, which is
Yes. Well, let's do that.
well, this is Simon Munnery. He's kind of my living comedy hero is Simon Munnery. He's as good as he ever was. He's a genius. I think more than anything, it's not so much the comic skill, which he does have in buckets. It's just an interesting mind. This is a mind I want to meet. This is someone who genuinely sees things a different way. Just occasionally, I think, oh, I've had half of that thought that he's coming out with. I thought I was eccentric for having that thought, but he's gone all the way and he's finessed it. And
Yes.
I'm really laughing. So it's the surprise, it's the recognition, it's the honing of it. I'm just endlessly in love with Simon Munnery to this day. But those early days, he had so he ran a nightclub called Club Zarathustra, in which traditional stand-up comedy was kind of forbidden. You were supposed to do something a bit odd, in a bit of a callback to the 80s comedy we've been talking about.
Yes.
And his little catchphrase for himself, and it's kind of a joke as well, is if the audience is behind you, you're facing the wrong way, which is lovely. So, literally, if the audience is behind you, you probably are facing the wrong way. But it also means if you're just giving them what they want, if you're just giving them the usual platitudes, if you're speaking in the way of a comedian and ending on a joke, that's wrong. You should actually be challenging this stuff. And that's one of the things I love about Munnery. He's not hostile to an audience. No one leaves it feeling stupid. But at the same time, you're not in the hands of Michael McIntyre here. You are going to be challenged. And you do need to kind of raise your game a little bit to enjoy an hour of
Yes. Well, there you go. Did you also go back and hear people like Vivian Stanshaw and comedians like that? Or, I mean, you mentioned Captain Beefheart. I know John Peel would often say, the brain of someone like that is just so on a different planet that you just feel quite intimidated. So is Simon the equivalent of those two?
He's almost the next generation because it kind of comes off the back of, he comes off the back of true alternative comedy. So he's a bit late for that. He's, you could describe him as alternative comedy and not be wrong, but it's the second generation of it. So this is after Alexei Sale, Tony Allen, the young, everyone who's in the Young Ones or not the 9 o'clock news gang, maybe. That's the true alternative. But before that, there was a kind of foundation around 1976 that doesn't quite qualify as alternative comedy, but we're talking about people like, I'm friends now with John Dowie, actually, and I think there is a strong case for him being the first ever alternative comedian. He used to cycle around pre-industry, so no agent or management or anything like this. He would just cycle around, putting up his own homemade posters, advertising his one-man show in a room above a pub.
Oh, right.
That is halfway there, It's also, he was doing original stuff because, before that, you've got working men's comics and they don't do original stuff. They share jokes. It's jokes, not stories. And it usually tacks to the right politically, whereas alternative comedy famously is to the left. And that really starts with John Dowie as well. Yeah, but I mean, John Dowie, if you have a year zero attitude to Dowie, which I kind of do, it's interesting to ask him what his inspirations were. So you mentioned if Stan Stjolly, yeah, exactly, or Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, Monty Python to an extent. That was the bold 70s. It was part of the satire boom. It all kind of came off the back of Alan Bennett and Beyond the Fringe, that kind of scene.
Yes.
You can see how we've gone from this very polite Oxbridge world and it's gradually tickled its way into more working class sensibilities via people like Dowie, really.
Yes, because I think there was also kind of that curiosity of culture and sort of thinking, right, I must get into Lenny Bruce and Richard Pryor. And there was something called the Fire Sign Theatre Company and the Living Theatre and various other ones. There was, San Francisco had various kind of, I suppose, kind of weird cabaret theatre.
Yes,
vaguely sexual.
That's really the very beginning. That's a club called the Hungry Eye in San Francisco. That is really the beginning of modern comedy. So America was way ahead by sort of 25, 30 years. Yeah. We actually sent comedians over to America to learn about it. I think there's a guy, Andy Delatorre. I don't know if you remember Andy Delatorre, the brother of Francis Delatorre. He actually got an Arts Council grant to go over and sort of anthropologically learn about stand-up comedy or alternative stand-up comedy and bring it back as a kind of arty challenge to the scene that was dominated by people like Bernard Manning and Frank Carson in the 70s. It's like, no, let's go over and see what they're doing. Let's hear about these truth tellers like Lenny Bruce and like Who did you mention before? There was somebody else.
Well, there was Richard Pryor.
Richard Pryor, yeah. But I mean, he did start that way. So I mean, we know everyone knows Richard Pryor and Lenny Bruce from the movies and from their recorded specials. But before that, they were working in these kind of beatnik bars like the Hungry Eye, and actually, stand-up was only one thing that happened there. There'd be a stand-up comedian, Mort Saal from Montreal, who ended up going to San Francisco. He's really the first ever modern comedian. But you'd have someone like him on doing his gags and songs. But you'd also have a poet. You might have someone with just a rant, like a kind of soapbox type thing.
Yes.
And you might have something a bit far out, like a juggler or a circus performer. And that's really what I miss. That's the thing that never, it never made it to television in Britain. It never made it to the big Live at the Apollo things. No. And actually, I think that's how, with our film, I think that's why people like Stuart Lee and Joe Brand agreed to be in it, because as wonderful as they are, I think, and as strange as the Iceman is, I think they understand that there's a parallel dimension somewhere where the winds did not blow in the favor of stand-up comedy to become the mainstream thing. It could have gone the other way, and we would have had more diverse, more eccentric performing artists now on Live at the Apollo and on television and whatnot. It's possible.
Yes, God, yes, it's kind of, so that's, yes, Simon Mullery. Then how did you then become, well, how did you start to sort of think about making this film about dear old Anthony, the Iceman? Because this is quite niche, isn't it? And I can't imagine it being that easy. I mean, one has these ideas late at night when you sometimes been drinking, but then you wake up and think, God, that's a disaster. I hope no one else has remembered that we spoke about. That was, yeah. Well, I just remember there was all those people like Raw Sex, weren't there? Malcolm Hardy as well. That scene was all, and Arthur Smith. And I mean, the UEA had all these guys who, like the Higsons and Serious Drinking. I mean, I know they're bands, but there was Charlie Higson, weren't there? So there was a lot of kind of people just going to university to get the grant because they wanted to form a band or become something to do with comedy or theatre. I think there was that gave me, like a lot of people said, oh God, that's 3 years. I don't have to be going to the dole office. I can just, get the grant and sort of try and network a bit. So yeah, there was that kind of whole scene going on as well.
Yeah, that's another thing that's changed the scene, because there is no 3 years of being in the warm, really. You have to pay to be there for those 3 years, and your career depends on it in a way that it didn't in the 80s so much. And if you waste those 3 years, you're kind of in a lot of trouble. You're in a huge amount of debt, and you've kind of got no recourse, really. But in those days, yes, you had a grant. You kind of had 3 years to study, but as we all know, study is kind of a part-time thing, really. And so you could do things like create a comedy club, or at least do a turn. Or you could create something like The Greatest Show on Legs, which is another example of the kind of act you're talking about, and do things like they're famous for a naked balloon dance.
The balloon dance. Yeah, I have seen that live on New Year's Eve, actually.
Oh, fantastic, yeah.
In a marquee in Suffolk. It was quite weird, actually. But yes, it was quite extraordinary, really.
I think they still do it. I think one of their number is Martin Sohn, who's brilliant. He's sort of... how do you describe Martin Sohn? He's a quick change artist and a brilliant props maker. He makes very funny comedy props for himself and others. But he was one of the Greatest Show on Legs. And I'm pretty sure he still runs a club in London where he will still do The Greatest Show on Legs. Either it'll be a proper reunion or he'll get 2 other people to do it with him.
Yes.
So that lives on. That's nice. But yeah, you were asking about how on earth do we alight upon doing a film about the Iceman.
So did this happen during lockdown, or was it already on the horizon before lockdown?
What happened was 2010. I wrote a little book about Club Zarathustra, the aforementioned place where stand-up was banned. And everyone I met and interviewed, so I met a lot of wonderful performers, and I met witnesses, just people who were in the audience, or journalists who reviewed it, who I was able to track down. And the people I was interested in were Simon Munnery, Stuart Lee, Sally Phillips, and a guy called Roger Mann. They were the kind of the ones I was most interested in. But they all said, no, there was a thing called the Iceman. He was on the first ever time they did it. We think he was on the opening night. And he only actually did it about 5 times, but everyone remembers the Iceman. And they all say, oh, you've got to track him down. You've got to track him down. In 2010, I couldn't. I'm very good at finding people, but he was just off the radar. Everyone had told me he was older than the core gang. So I thought, right, maybe he's no longer with us, or maybe he came to his senses like Roger Mann did and realized there's no money in this shenanigans. Roger Mann went away and made money in IT, I think.
Yes.
He retired early, I think, and now he lives very happily in France. So I thought, well, maybe it's one of those situations, because he wasn't on social media. No one had a number for him. He was just vanished. So it's like, okay, well, we'll describe the Iceman in this book. And if I go back to that book, it's 2 pages just of what people told me. He melted a block of ice. That's kind of it. It's like, okay, all right, cool. So he's got mention in the book, which is what always happened to the Iceman back then. If you read a book of comedy history or Stuart Lee's wonderful big book where he annotates his own act, the Iceman always gets a mention, but it's 2 lines. It's a footnote, It's like, there must be more to him than this. It's such a mystery, and I want to know more. Then Stuart Lee in 2011 got him out of retirement somehow and put him on at a 1980s kind of throwback night at the Royal Festival Hall. Iceman was playing in the lobby as you went in, so all the big acts had their 20 minutes on stage. Iceman's playing in the foyer, so you go in and he's there doing his thing, which I think would probably work really well, actually. But then basically he was back on the radar then. And I don't know if it was this event that stimulated it, but he wanted to become a painter, a visual artist. So he set up a website, and all of a sudden he was contactable. I could get him. I thought, right, let's talk to the Iceman, because I think I had the idea of a second edition of this book in mind. We have to get the Iceman. So when I met him, there was more to the story than that. And so I wrote a whole book about the Iceman. It's basically an extended interview. I talked to him for about 9 hours at the Battersea Arts Centre, perfect place for it. And I edited it and spruced it up and made it all make sense. And we cut it in with examples of his art, a few photographs from the day, a foreword by Simon Munnery and an afterword by Stuart Lee. Suddenly we've got a 200-page book. And it's probably the book I'm proudest of. I've got eight books out there with my name on it now. Melt It, the Iceman book, is kind of the one I'm proudest of. It happened so quickly, and I have 0 regrets. When I read it back, it feels like there's no mistakes. I'm very, very proud of that book. It didn't sell gangbusters because, as you say, it's niche. About 150 people probably bought it. But one of them was Mark Cartwright, who is the director of the film. And it was right up his flagpole. It was exactly his kind of comedy. And I think he'd been looking for a niche subject to write a film about. So actually, just before we were recording, you were talking about, is it Tony Powell, the footballer?
Yes.
Strangely, Mark had a very similar story about a career footballer who just disappeared. I think Tony Powell disappeared because he was gay. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe Mark's guy disappeared because he joined, I think it was the Jehovah's Witnesses, but he turned his whole back on a career in football, millions of pounds, for spiritual reasons. So, I don't care for the Jehovah's Witnesses, but it's interesting as a story. And, that was his decision. So, but Mark and I aren't really interested in football. We're comedy people.
Yeah.
So when he got this book, he said, that's it. That's the Iceman. So he got me in for an interview like this one, a little podcast interview. And this took place at his house. And I think his ulterior motive really was to pitch the idea of the film. So once our interview was done, it was just us, me and him and our 2 partners were outside on his post-COVID sort of deck in the garden. And he just asked, is there a film in this? And I have very few business skills, right? But one is understanding route to market. I can see it. I can see how an idea will go from nothing to being in people's hands. I can kind of see the way through. Yeah. And I immediately saw it. I thought, yeah, we've got the content, the contacts, we've got the patience to see this through, even on no money. So Mark was the instigator, but I saw it. I thought, yeah, we can do this. So that's the origin.
Oh, that's amazing. Yes, it is kind of interesting because I did notice because in those days there wasn't often a lot of footage. You know, film is often the one thing that everybody struggles with because nowadays everyone would have film and at least a photograph or two. But then, you know, there was very little film. But what I noticed, and actually one of the first films I ever saw, which I thought was just delightful, was on a guy called Danny Fields, who was that record producer guy from the 60s and went into the 70s. He managed the Ramones and yeah, and he managed Jim Morrison, and he's got great stories about Jim Morrison, Nico, the Ramones, Iggy Pop, you know, all that. I mean, he was the one who printed the story about the Beatles saying that they were bigger than Jesus, which got them
Ah,
sort
of
of,
course.
and so to get to fill out the film, they would use those animated moments to sort of reenact Jim Morrison and Nico or the various scenes. So I've noticed that quite a lot of films from any period before photographs and photography and was easily accessible, people would always use this to sort of fill in the narrative, which was quite interesting. So I can't actually, I just saw the film. Do you use those moments as well?
But very briefly, we used it for one sequence. I think we probably would have used it more. We didn't really have the money, but we had a really fantastic animator, Michael, who is clearly a fan of our kind of comedy. And we said, well, we can use it for something, so we'll give you this Stuart Lee sequence because we knew he liked Stuart Lee, and
Right.
he's illustrated it perfectly. It's one of the highlights of the film, and actually, it's also just to give Mark his props again. I think it comes in at exactly the right time because you think, if we're really going to make a feature-length film all about this one niche act, yes, we are. We're determined to do that. But I think when the animation comes in, it's just an injection of energy. I think it's just the right moment when I think maybe some people in the room who aren't as into this as I am, maybe this is where they start flagging. And then suddenly you've got this lovely animated sequence, and I really think it's whoosh, just kind of puts a rocket under it a little bit. So I'm
Mhm.
quite happy with that. It's a bit of a cliche, isn't it, to use the animation these days? But there's times when it's wonderful. It's a brilliant documentary about. He's the guy who he worked for or ran the Louvre, the museum in Paris, during the war, and it became evident what was going to happen. The Germans were on their way, and the Nazis were going to loot the Louvre, basically. And he emptied it. It was incredible. It was like a sort of home run heist where they brought all of these masterpieces out and hid them. That they put them in private hands and into storage in places where the Nazis couldn't find this artwork. So
Right.
I can't remember the name of the documentary, but it stands in my memory as one that uses animation very well because obviously there's no footage of that.
Yes.
So that was really good. And like missing Doctor Who's and things like that, there's quite a few of those that have been animated. And if we didn't have those animations, we'd have nothing. You know, it's times when they've got the soundtrack to it, but no visuals. So animation's handy, but I guess maybe it's a little overused today. So we're
Yeah,
playing
I
it
mean,
more.
if you get to see this film about the butthole surfers, they
Oh yeah,
use a lot of animated moments where things are happening and people getting beaten up and yeah, you know, all their little tour bus doing things. And I guess yes, you actually that bit you said about you know things flagging and then having something to sort of G it up again just to give you a bit of a sugar hit can be
yeah.
quite useful and just
That's the
kind of
genius of Mark. Yeah,
demonstrate what was happening backstage when people were getting slightly debauched actually at the time. So with a film like this, did you then sit down very carefully and storyboard it and say, right, we need this, and then go out and do it, or did you get the footage and then work out how to put it into a narrative?
the structure came from the book, so we never felt the need for storyboards, but the book kind of served the role of storyboards. The book has a structure, and the film hasn't really deviated from that structure. There's a few exceptions. One is we couldn't afford. So there's a chapter in the book about Anthony's TV work. We couldn't afford to get that footage. We did approach the BBC for things like footage from. There's like a Noel Edmonds Christmas special that the Iceman appeared on, and there was I think he was on the tunnel. I think he was on. No, sorry, the tube rather. He
Oh
was on these
yes,
shows. But we couldn't get them. We couldn't get them cleared. So we've seen the footage. Most of it's floating around the internet in pieces, unindexed. So we've seen a lot of it. So we know it happened, but we couldn't get clearance for the quality footage.
Yes.
Honestly, they want thousands, literally thousands for a minute of old footage from Noel Edmonds' Christmas special. I mean, who cares, you know? So we couldn't afford it. So although we've got some footage of him performing live, we did manage to get that into the film. The actual stuff from TV we couldn't use. So that's one of the deviations from the structure. We kind of just threw that out. So we do have footage of people talking about the TV work and talking about he did some adverts and things like that, but we were not able to use anything.
Yes.
So that falls away.
Because it is very interesting because I guess he was very, very excited and keen and said yes to this project. He didn't have to be sort of tickled or sort of...
Not really. We have to sort of cajole him a little bit to perform it again. So you'll see some footage in the film of we got him one last gig called The Final Block, where he melts his ice at the Bill Murray Comedy Club. Sold the whole room out, and it was filmed by Go Faster Stripe, who is wonderful Chris Evans of Cardiff. He films fringe acts, basically. So we had it professionally filmed by a whole second unit for no money because they can release it as a show as well. That was the one thing he wasn't sure about. He kind of didn't want to perform the whole thing again. I don't know why. Did he think it was just a kind of thing that was behind him now, or maybe it's not very dignified for a man of his years or something to be performing in that way? I'm not sure, but he wasn't keen. So we said, well, could you do a talk about it? And he said, yes, I'll do a talk about it. Right. But once that's happening, the temptation is to actually have all the props there. So he did bring a block of ice, and he basically did it all properly. And once it was underway, it sort of started as a talk, but once he was in that atmosphere, he was under the lights, and people were shouting his name and things. It was just like riding I was going to say like riding a bike. It's more like riding a unicycle in his case.
Yes, he was. I know, that was very sweet. I thought, oh my God, at that age, please don't end up in A&E on that unicycle. But I think he must be very keen, because I'm sure from memory, he had, when I did that interview 4 years ago, I think he had the block of ice there, actually. I think it was there on screen. I think it was like, oh God, you got your block.
Yeah, because he did it for, we got him to go on Richard Herring's podcast to kind of, I think it was basically to promote the book. And he did the whole having a block of ice thing, and he was doing all these sight gags, which really worked in our favour, because that all went onto YouTube. Because normally with Herring these days, it's audio only, but because he was physically clowning around, it all actually went onto YouTube. So that was quite handy for us.
Yeah, so just his life was quite fascinating, because he has this, he joins the circus, doesn't he? This is the Italian circus. And I had no idea about copyrighting your makeup as a clown. That was, and the egg, that was
really glad you said that, because we couldn't tell, because being sort of comedy world people, we thought, does everybody know about the egg thing? But then we started asking around. It's like, no, like that's crazy. What are you talking about? So yeah, just for the boys and girls at home, basically a clown's makeup is supposed to be unique.
Yes.
You do all of your sort of junior clowning first, and you build a clown personality, and whatever that is will inform your makeup. So once you've got your face, you don't have to, but it's a tradition. You register it with this clown makeup registry.
Yeah.
The way of doing it is to have it painted onto an egg. So in the old days, it was a real egg, like with the guts blown out of it. It was a hollow eggshell, I think. But these days, the eggs are actually made of porcelain, so they will last. But it's there, and they've got about, I think it's like 130 eggs. Yeah. So I've been fascinated by this for years. The thing about this film, we kind of knew the whole thing wasn't ever going to make any money. So what do we get out of it? One of the things is a little bit of wish fulfillment. And it was like, well, okay, I'm going to go to the egg registry at last. Let's do that. And it was fantastic, because I'd heard, because it used to be in a church somewhere.
Right.
And, but that's all kind of closed down. And I'd heard they were just in somebody's basement. And I thought, oh, okay, it's not going to be very filmic, is it, going down into someone's cobwebby basement? But that's not what it's like at all. It's a really nice finished basement. It's a room of a guy's house. The guy whose house it is Matty Faint, who's the kind of guy who runs Clowns International, who, among other things, look after the egg registry.
Yes.
And we had to kind of prove that he was a real clown, because they're they take it seriously. We had to prove that he was a real clown, so we found some like show posters and things from the old days, and we had to recreate the makeup. So we got an artist called Samara Liebner to look at the posters and kind of recreate that face on kind of a mask, and then the actual official clown egg painter could take that and transfer it onto an egg. And you get 2 copies. You get one for the clown and one for the museum. And theoretically, the egg in the museum will just be there forever, hopefully.
Yeah, my God, that's a lovely kind of moment in the film. So educational as well, isn't it?
The whole thing is about paying tribute to the man, Anthony, because me and Mark have fallen in love with him a little bit. It's gone kind of beyond the Iceman. What a strange thing. We really love the man behind the Iceman. The 3 of us have become quite close, and we're friends. And so we thought, right, instead of just talking about clowns, how are we going to visualize this? Right, we're going to honor him with an egg. We're going to make sure that period of his life is recognized, as well as the ice block thing, because I think he's aware that he used to do lots of stuff. He used to do all sorts of fringe theatre, and the Iceman was the one that stuck in people's memories. But I think he's always thought, no, there's more to me than that. And one of the things is the clowning. So that was, let's honour that by getting the egg.
And it must definitely help for performing, to sort of get into that sort of character and have that training and have that kind of experience, because it was to do with the kangaroo, wasn't it? It was like, Jesus, that is so random.
A boxing kangaroo act. So I was familiar with the genre of that. I knew about boxing kangaroo acts, but I never met anyone who'd done it. And we think it must have been one of the last ones ever in Europe. We think it was because they banned it. They banned it shortly after. So he was doing a very traditional Victorian style of clowning. Really iconic stuff. It's that circus. We've looked into it. It's everything you imagine when you think of a circus. Rightly, we've moved on. We've got Cirque du Soleil type things now where it's all about the human acrobat.
Yes.
This was more, they had wonderful acrobats, and he's told me a lot about the trapeze artists and the other clowns, but they did have animals as well. He actually shared, I don't think this is in the film, he actually, as a clown, he would sleep in the same enclosure as the kangaroo. So this is what we're talking about, yeah. Kind of crazy.
He bonded with that car. Just imagine that. And going, well, I suppose it's good to build that kind of relationship. And then, during the film as well, he has the stroke, doesn't he? Which is, it's so when he's there and he's struggling, and you're saying, "Are you okay?" Was he actually was that kind of actually, you got to get to the hospital pretty soon?
That was not the stroke. That was he did have a strange moment where. What you saw is basically it. I think I said, you're scaring me a bit. Are you okay? And he said, I would like a glass of water. So he had a glass of water, a bit of a sit down, and we never really learned anything more about it. We just thought, okay, we all have a bit of a funny moment sometimes, whatever. It was a long day, I think it was in summer, so the sun was shining down. So we didn't think a great deal of it, but our cameraman's a pro, and the camera sort of points to the floor, doesn't it? We didn't want to catch him in trouble on camera.
Yes.
But it was over. We had 10 minutes, and we just got on with things. Didn't think anything of it. The call about his stroke came much later, months after that. And it was compounded by the fact that he was riding his bicycle through Bournemouth when it actually happened. So he fell off his bike. Some nice people came to help him, and the paramedics came really quickly, and he went off to hospital. But the stroke has slowed him down. It's not a nice thing to see as somebody's friend. So how did it go? I'm trying to remember. I think we had a date to film. He was going to be presenting his artwork at a gallery called the Tabernacle in London.
Right.
He was insistent on still doing it. It was like a week after his stroke, but we and his wife kind of said, no, this isn't good. You shouldn't be working. Let's rest up. And I'm glad he did, because you can see the difference. If you look at the scenes in the film that were recorded 3 years ago, they're kind of in the black void. It's just me and Anthony on a stage with just black curtains. He's much sort of quicker with his storytelling than he is now. He's recovering well. I think he's improving. So the bits where we're sitting in his garden by the trampoline, I think that was his slowest moment. He's kind of improved since then. So
Right.
he's on the mend. But all of his sort of sense of humour about it is very admirable. But it wasn't a mini stroke, as they first said. He had a stroke, and I think he's suffered as a result of it. But he's back on his feet. He is working again. He's got another show coming up soon, an art show that is not performance piece.
Yes, yeah, I know it's kind of a bit weird actually because I think it was last year. A friend had a heart attack, and he'd been sort of I'd been with him during the day, and then he was like complaining a bit, feeling bad, and then was sort of complaining a bit more. Then then I sort of phoned 111, and it was like, I'm sure you're fine, and it was kind of weird because at lunchtime I'd been, because I'm obsessed with David Bowie, talking about when David Bowie had his heart attack and was struggling, and no one sort of, it was the shoulder thing, which was apparently classic. He went to the hospital and they didn't do the test to say, oh God, yeah, actually, we'll just quickly do all these tests. And if you're if you're a doctor or nurse and you go, oh my God, this is David Bowie, you think, oh my God, let's just do all the tests and hang out with you and become best friends, David. And all in a weird way, you just think you would be quite sort of thorough, really, rather than a bit blasé, go, no, you just got a trapped nerve. And then he has this horrendous heart attack and then disappears for most of his kind of latter years until he reappeared again. And yeah, so it is a bit of a shocker because it's not the dramatic thing. It's a bit of a bit people kind of sort of grumbling a bit and at the same time think, no, I'm all right. But it's like, no, actually, I think there's something a bit more serious here.
Yeah, it's the inclination to kind of minimize it, isn't it? Because the alternative is horrible. You don't really want to entertain the idea that you've had a heart attack or a stroke, but actually that's kind of what you have to do. Maybe it's a British thing. I don't know. Maybe it's different in different parts of the world. Maybe people do take these things more seriously in the first minutes because that's what you're supposed to do, isn't it?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So then the film, it's kind of amazing. You've got here, was his wife, his appears, which is always kind of exciting. Was she keen on this movie? Did she think, oh, this is a great idea, but I don't want anything to do with it? Or was she quite pleased to be interviewed?
She was fairly pleased. Yeah, it was another one where we spent maybe 2 or 3 hours interviewing, and only a couple of minutes actually made it into the film. We found that storytelling is the most important thing when presenting these talking heads. So actually, we have footage of Wendy and everybody else you see in the film talking about every single Iceman related issue you can think of, but we just put in the best bits. We put in the bits that actually help to tell the story. No, she was relatively keen. She's clearly proud of him for his visual art. She was very pleased to talk about that, and she was actually around. She was around in the old days of because she was a performer too. She was a dancer,
Right.
and she was also involved in some of his early experimental theatre. So. And actually, a vestige of that is people in the film talk about the loop. There's like an irritating soundtrack, just a tight loop of oh my God, I can't even remember who the artist is now. We used to know exactly who he was, but I forgot. But it's just an old-fashioned jazz voice saying, you don't realize you love me, just on a loop like that. And he goes on for 20 minutes, and then a lady's voice comes in and says, but I don't love you. That voice is actually Wendy Irvine. That is his wife. And
Right.
they used to do all sorts of double act things.
Yes. Well,
I think there's a bit more about that in the book. Well,
yeah, because it's often, because we had a guy around here who used to do performance art called Bruce Lacey, and he did various things in the 60s and was in a Beatles film and worked with a lot of those Spike Milligan and Michael Benteen and people like that. But then in the 70s, he got into the fairs and festivals of East Anglia, which were these 3-day events. And he got very into ritual and doing slightly, talk about religious or spiritual appropriation. It was just a free-for-all. It was a bit of a North American Indian stuff and various other bits and pieces. Often him hopping around naked, but, painted up, firing. Yes, he was very keen on the bow and arrow, firing in a flaming arrow into a moving target, which often was spinning round, which would eventually hit, but he would miss a lot. And, there was, this was the pre, health and safety days where people would still be, like get behind, get away from the target. Bruce is about to, and he's not a good shot. And people were sometimes a bit slow to move, which I was always like a bit staggered because I was sprinting for my life. And these arrows, which were on fire, would be going towards this spinning target of made of straw. And as that sort of got hit, eventually it started to burn. And then as it was twirling, this burning straw would be flying everywhere, which was all sort of, it made the act much better. On one level, it was like quite boring. But on another, there was this quite a sense of danger and disaster looming for anybody kind of close to Bruce, this wildly naked man, which was slightly painted in that hippie way. It was, it was of its time, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I love a bit of that. And there are still people who do, they're not courting the danger of it, but the thing about ritual, I mean, I guess Bill Drummond is kind of along those lines. And
Yes.
there's a brilliant, he's an Australian performer called Ron. He's a jester. And he does these durational performances, just really long. So, he talks about doing 12 hours in a festival because he doesn't work on a stage. He integrates, he goes around and integrates and mingles with people, clowning. So he'll do that for hours and hours and hours. And I just think that's so cool. I think that's absolutely amazing. So
Yes.
all comedians are a little bit aware of their stage hours. That's like, well, when you're young, you'll take every little 5-minute spot you can get because you're sort of vaguely aware of approximately how long you've done in your life. But this just blows everything out of the water, doesn't it? If you go, yes, I did 8 hours, it kind of piles it up.
Well, there was a lot
So
of,
I do like
yeah,
that.
because I was a bit intrigued with some of these kind of alternative scenes. And there was a guy called Neil Oram, and he wrote a play with somebody else, a 9-hour play, I think it was called The Warp.
Was it Ken Campbell?
Yes, God, you've got a good one, haven't you? Yeah, so I mean, there's a bit of copyright ownership between the two of them, though. I think Ken's dead and Neil's still alive. But again, he's one of those very eccentric people that, but time was irrelevant. It was just like make it very long and kill the audience with boredom. But it will be memorable in some ways. But again, a great storyteller. Followed various ley lines and spiritual earth centers and
Yes, that's
found this
it.
place in Calendish. No one owned it, and then then he sort of just took ownership of it, and then would have traveling theatre companies, which were quite strange. And yes, it was, and I got to visit him, and my God, he's got some amazing stories. I have got an interview with him. If you ever want to listen to it, it's a bit like you can hear me just going, "Oh my God."
Yeah,
And he
yeah.
did a one-man show in Edinburgh. I saw it. It was like being performed about 11 o'clock one night. And I thought I should go and see him because I'd stayed at his place just off Drumnadrocket. Yeah, that was extraordinary. So the eccentrics are about, but they're getting very old. I'm sure there's younger ones happening. So with the Iceman then, so he was quite cagey when I interviewed him about post what happens next. That's the same in your film, isn't it? It's a little bit, yes, let's not talk about that. That will spoil it. Was that the same with you?
It was a little bit. I mean, he doesn't actually have anything to be embarrassed about at all. I mean, he basically became a family man and went and got a Joe job essentially, which is something we all have to do sometimes. So I think that's literally all he's embarrassed about is what he did during that time. But we did look into it. He was a drama teacher for a while, and we actually found one of his students who gave us a nice interview that didn't make it into the film.
Right.
We kind of felt like, let's keep it mysterious, actually, because what actually happened in the missing years was not actually terribly exciting. He just had jobs,
Yes.
That's basically all it was. But he was cagey about it, and you see me. It's the interview in the garden. You see me sort of extending a bit of respect in my question. I was kind of telling him you don't have to talk about this if you don't want to, because he didn't really want to talk about it when we did the book. And now that there's actually cameras on him, I didn't want him to feel pressured into thinking he had to, because he doesn't have to. He doesn't have to tell us anything that he doesn't want to talk about. He did hint at it for the benefit of the film, but the actual truth of it is he had some jobs. That's really it.
Yes.
One of them being drama teacher, which is understandable for a performer, but some of them were far more sort of manual labor. He said he was working down a hole on the road and things like that. Yes, that's essentially it.
That's
Not
it.
tremendously exciting, and it's
No.
his private life, of course.
So just a curiosity, the film. So how long did it take from the filming it to editing it to then the final moment where you think that's it, we've done it?
It took about 3 years, and the reason it took so long, actually, that's not long in making film terms, but to start with, it's really only a side project for me. And
Yeah.
also, Mark, the director, has a day job as well. So, although it's his passion, it's kind of a part-time thing. But it also expanded amazingly. I mean, that's been a recurring thing since meeting Anthony. Little ideas become big products. So actually, the book, the first idea for the book was one thing I knew about him was that he'd take a Polaroid photograph of the block before melting it. And I thought, wow, if he's got thousands of those, we could just put them all together as kind of a coffee table book. And unfortunately, he didn't have them all. He's got sort of, I think there were 56 of them. He'd thrown out hundreds and hundreds of them. So that little idea became bigger because I thought, well, maybe we can run an interview alongside it to kind of flesh out this. But then the interview became the main thing and the Polaroids kind of took a back seat.
Yeah.
And that kind of happened with the film because originally it was supposed to be one shoot. So the scenes you see where it's the black void again, black curtains behind me and Anthony, that was it. It was going to be, that's our interview. And if we're lucky, we'll get some talking heads. We knew we could get a few talking heads. We didn't know we'd get Joe Brand. That was a nice surprise. And we just cut away occasionally to talking heads. But the main thing would just be the chat, because that's essentially what the book is. And this is supposed to be an adaptation of the book. But again, it's just blossomed and bloomed from there because we realized, oh, we could film at his house and we could film in his studio and, oh, we could get an artist to give an impression of it. And then Mark had the idea of him apologizing to the kangaroo. So before you know it, you're trying to get permission to film at the zoo and things like that. You think, right, this is really...
That is such a lovely bit with him, with the kangaroos. Oh, God.
I'm glad you like it.
It was so... were they kangaroos, though?
They were wallabies. I think that was because there was only a couple of places in Britain where they have a red kangaroo.
Right.
I think it was post-stroke as well, so we didn't want to schlep poor Anthony all the way up to Edinburgh. Because I remember there's one in Edinburgh Zoo, but there was wallabies relatively close to home, so we just thought, well, we'll make it into a joke.
Excellent. Yeah, that was kind of sweet, actually, that bit. Yeah, no, it's like, and also that I liked the bit at the end with the paintings, because everyone's, always going to be pressured to say, oh, yes, it was wonderful, I love this. But Stuart Lee didn't. He was not keen on it, was he?
It's one of the biggest laughs in the film, isn't it, really? He says it's secondary to the actual performance, and he thinks that if that's his attempt at legacy, it's a bad idea because the purity of the Iceman should just kind of remain intact.
Yes.
I mean, he's being Stuart Lee, he doesn't really think they should be put in a chipper or whatever it was he said. But he's kind of halfway to being his stage persona when we were filming him. So, yeah, he's just being Stuart Lee. You never really know with Stuart Lee. He said things to me that are just, you think, really? Is that true, or are you winding me up?
Yes, well, I wondered. But it was quite interesting, because I suppose it touched on that thing with certain land art where, Richard Long, he would do pieces in the landscape, and that, you'd be able to photograph it. And Andy Goldsworthy was another one, wasn't it? You could photograph it, but it's going to sort of disappear. And I suppose that was the same with the Iceman, really. But at the same time, it's interesting that he documented it with a picture. And Bruce Lacey was very keen to sort of film all his kind of performance art pieces. But again, it's not really been archived that well. So they're kind of just stuck in some cupboard somewhere. And they need somebody who really loves archiving to somehow document it. I think the BFI have documented all his films into a 7 DVD box set with all his bits and pieces. But yeah, to just kind of a legacy is quite a different one. So that you must have, you coming along and your team is just brilliant for these people, because actually it just cements it, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think you asked if he had to be sort of coaxed to do anything. He didn't, but in the early days, I think there was a question of, is this the right thing to do to make a book about this? Because the blocks have melted, and that's kind of what the art's about. It's supposed to be transient. Nothing is supposed to remain. But I think he was always kind of lusting after a little bit of permanence to these things, because, for example, it's another thing that's not in the film, but it's in the book. He talks about ghost blocks, and what he means by that, he does it like as a sort of act. So he goes to a venue where he's been, where he's actually melted a block, and he'll go, yes, I remember, I can sense the block, kind of where it used to be. So he's doing a bit, but I think there is part of him that does kind of wish there was some kind of residue of the act.
Yes.
Nothing was ever recorded and all this sort of thing. But we finally managed to piece something together. And I think he's pretty happy with that. I think he's pretty proud of it. And also one of the bits we haven't talked about yet is the Dr. Oliver Double at the University of Kent. He has an archive of British comedy. So we've opened an Iceman file at that library now. So there's a few bits and bobs in it, and hopefully we can flesh it out a bit more as time goes on. Yeah.
So that's the University of Kent, did you say?
Yes. I sometimes mistakenly say Kiel. I think I've said that wrongly on some podcasts, but it is in fact Kent. Yeah.
So because I know Stewart was involved with King Rocker, Robert Lloyd from the Nightingales, and that eventually comes out on Sky Arts, which is very lucky for the financing. So how do you then progress this film? Does this sort of become available via some streaming site, or how do you, or selective cinemas?
It will eventually. There'll be the director Mark is very fond of physical media, so there will be a DVD at some point. There will be some kind of stream. We're just resisting putting it onto a video on demand platform now that kind of nobody will watch. We'd like a broadcaster, so something like Sky Arts would be ideal. We'd all make a bit of money, but also it would get a big audience, which is kind of the whole point of this, is to tell the world about Anthony and the Iceman. So that's obviously the gold standard. But at the moment, we're really, really enjoying touring it around small independent cinemas. It's been nothing but fun. So we just did 8 of them back to back with only one night off, and that was brilliant fun. And we've got 3 more coming up. Depending on when this pod goes out, we've got one on August the 8th in Edinburgh. Then we've got one coming up in North London, going back to the Bill Murray, and we're doing one also in Kendal, which sounds a bit random, but there's a method to our madness. Our executive producer is Michael Cumming, and that's where he's originally from.
Oh,
that's it. So we're hoping he'll join us in the Q&A for that. Yeah,
that would be quite nice. Where was that last one?
Kendal. So actually, if you go to you look at our Instagram account, Melt It Film, or go to my website, wringham.co.uk, you'll see our upcoming dates. So even if you're listening to this podcast in the distant future, there may yet be dates for it, because we really like Michael Cummings' way of. Are you familiar with Oxide Ghosts?
No.
It's a Michael Cumming, who's our executive producer. He was also the director of Brass Eye back in the late
yes, Chris Morris.
And so he's been touring the kind of extra features of Brass Eye that they never showed. They never put all this stuff on. They never did the usual DVD thing or whatever. But he's actually touring it around, and the attraction of that is getting Brass Eye fans together in a room. And it just feels exciting. So you're there to see something unique and original. There's a Q&A with Michael at the end where you can finally get some questions answered that you've been carrying around for years. And some of the questions are great. Like he doesn't get stupid audiences. He gets really, really good questions. I've seen it twice. And questions are brilliant. So they're brilliant nights. So that's kind of our idea, borrowed from Michael, is to go around these independent theatres. You meet the nicest, most interesting people you ever meet, and that's it. We get the questions from the audience. We show the film, and we all sing Anthony's praises and raise a glass to the old 80s and 90s days of oddball comedy as well.
Fantastic. So, just 2 quick questions then, because one thing I just remembered, one name that came up was Mike Myers.
Yes.
So was he? I didn't realise he did alternative comedy in the early 80s in Britain.
That's right. Yeah, he was in a double act with Neil Mullarkey. Neil Mullarkey people will know from Whose Line Is It Anyway? He's a
Right.
great improviser. So they used to have a double act together that they did in the early days of the Comedy Store, and yeah, that was kind of his start. But I mean, I remember him, Mike Myers, that is, from being a little kid because he would do. What were they called? It was like the Timmy Mallet sort of ITV
Right.
Wide Awake Club and Wackaday and things like that. I remember him clearly from that, but he would have been a teenager in that. He would have been 18 or 20 at
Oh.
tops when he was in that.
Did you
Um,
did you get a quote for him, or did you just have a quote from a previous?
we couldn't quite reach him. We did try. We did reach out, but alas, we did not get Mike Myers. That would have been quite a coup. It would also, though, the downside of it was going to be we'd break our rule about no Zoom footage.
Oh,
After the pandemic, we were sick of seeing people on Zoom. So right,
yes,
that's a rule. We have to meet everyone in person and film them properly. But for Mike Myers, I think we would have settled for a Zoom.
yeah.
So at least that's an upside. We stuck to our rule in the end, but only to
Yes, well,
Mike.
I did. So I did enjoy that series on the first part of the pandemic with David Tennant and the other guy, the Welsh chap, who did that. Two struggling actors who were just meeting.
Oh yes, yes, I do remember that.
Oh
I think
God,
that's because we had no choice. That was just
that
kind
was
of
it, and they were just very bored looking at each other on Zoom, and that was great. The first series was brilliant. The second one was tedious, but I thought, yeah, I suppose it was the
because we were
novelty.
over it. We all wanted to get outdoors again and go
Yes.
and live our lives as they were intended. Yeah.
So yeah, so Instagram is your social media platform, and also one thing that's always slightly bugged me, which I've never really knew what it was. I could have googled it and get the answer, but I'll ask you instead. So on the credits, there's often best boy, and then you put worst boy. What is that job?
There's no job. That is a vestige of a Kickstarter campaign we did to get things started. So we this is almost zero budget. We think the whole thing probably cost about 5,000 quid, but we
Right,
raised 2,000 from a Kickstarter early on. And one of the perks we were offering, we were originally offering credits. We were selling things like producer credits, but actually that Michael Cumming came on board as executive producer, and we thought, no, we can't sell credits like this anymore because we need to take that position seriously now. Michael Cumming's in the mix.
yes.
But one that we thought, oh, it's okay, we'll sell Worst Boy. We're going to sell Best Boy and Worst Boy, just as a joke. And but the person who bought the Worst Boy credit was Ian Lee, the comedian from the 11 o'clock show and whatnot.
Right.
So he's a friend of Mark's, and
Oh,
but it doesn't really work on any level because there's no best boy credit to make it into a joke, and there's no and also he shares it with his partner Catherine as well, so it's a bit confusing when you see it, but well spotted, by the way. You still would get away with it.
well, I was, yeah, it was like, I was always fascinated. Sometimes you, oh, yes, I must
Well,
answer.
actually,
Key,
most
like the key grip. I mean, what is a key grip, by the way?
exactly, it's something to do with. I think it's literally to do with cables, isn't it? I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Right.
Yeah, I work in film now, and I can't tell you what key grip is. It's because I don't know.
I just saw it and was like, oh, okay. I must
This whole
ask
thing's
that.
just a miracle. But it is amazing that this is a thing I've noticed from doing these screenings is people stay for the credits. It's like they're so interested, but there's still mystery to it. They stay for the credits as if that's going to kind of answer something. They'll see some names they recognize and they'll go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But I think
Yes.
we leave them slightly wanting, which was always the plan. That was,
Yeah, I suppose I've always been a little bit like, oh, some comment or some person mentioning something or a name often is enough for my little brain to get triggered a bit, and not in a
that's,
bad way, oh, actually, I must go and get an
yeah.
interview with him.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the way Stuart Lee used to talk about the Iceman, it was almost as if he was talking about Sasquatch or something, like, oh, I've got this blurry memory and I think I remember seeing him at this thing. So there was always this slight, aura of mystery around him. I thought, well, we don't want to blow that away completely. So we won't answer everything. We'll just give a more accurate portrait.
Yeah.
And
And I do think the documentation of these scenes is just absolutely fantastic and kind of fascinating. I know there's a few on various nightclubs that just sort of happened for a period of time.
Yeah.
Alice, there was one, I mean, I didn't go to it, Alice in Wonderland, which was one of those London scenes that probably only lasted 2 years. But it was a whole book, and they would do coach trips to various places, even coming to Great Yarmouth. And again, it's just kind of great that people just want to document it actually and just say, yes, I'm nerdy. There was a guy who went to the UEA from, he was from America. He went to the UEA for a bit, and then he was into collecting these things, like flyers. And he said yes, and he put a book together. In fact, he's got two. And I kind of think, thank God there's someone like that who spent their university days sort of collecting this stuff, and then
Yeah.
sort of
Throwing this stuff away.
30 years later put together a book that comes out on Thames and Hudson, I think, which is
Well, you're probably very familiar with Johnny Trunk Records.
Oh, yes.
He does amazing books. He's got one of supermarket carrier bags, things like that. I've got one of his about small films, Oliver Postgate and Peter Firmin's company, Clangers and Ivor the Engine and all that stuff. And it's just really nice quality photography of the original models, some of which are not in good condition, but thankfully most of them are. And it's just gorgeous stuff. But yeah, supermarket carrier bags, that's the kind of ephemera really we're talking about here, isn't it? When you're talking about show posters and things like that.
Yes, absolutely. And though someone did give me a carrier bag for Robbins Records, which was one of these record shops in Norwich, which was all black with just Robbins, and everyone threw them away. But actually, a few people who kept them. When you look at it, it just takes you emotionally back to that period of going into a smoky little place, feeling very intimidated, and being even more self-conscious about the record you're going to kind of literally announce to the world that you want, just in case you just fear that everyone's going to scoff at you.
I never keep them, like you'd think, having made this film and everything, you'd think, oh, he might be a hoarder or an archiver. No, I really just use things and then they're gone. It's really strange. So I had like an Honest John's carrier bag, and I thought, shall I keep that? That might be relevant one day. But I just used it until it fell apart. And then my friend runs a bookshop here in Glasgow called II Books, and I love his shop so much. So I always, if he gives me a bag, I use it. But again, I use it till there's a hole in it. So I never keep anything.
So is that guy, I mean, I think I did an interview with a member of a band called The Man from Del Monte.
Yes, that's Martin's band, absolutely. Which actually, the current manager of The Man from Del Monte is the aforementioned Ian Lee.
Yes, you're right. That name, yes, because I'd been in touch with him to find the members of the band,
Yeah,
and managed to get 3 out of the 4.
he's a lovely bloke and worth an interview in his own
Oh
right.
God, he's amazing to sort of get this band together again and to get them playing. Oh, so
Purely out of passion, from what I understand. Their manager in the old days was John Ronson.
yes, God.
But this is all just coincidence. Like I know about this stuff, and then it turns out that my local bookseller, who I see regularly, turns out he's the guitar player in Man from Del Monte, and I never knew that about him. But as soon as he said, he said, oh, yeah, I was in a band, and he was telling me anecdotes about Frank Sidebottom. It's like, okay, this all makes sense because he's from Manchester. I said, so what was the band you were in? He went, oh, the Man from Del Monte. So, right, yes, I know about that because John Ronson's talked about it.
Yeah.
And there's the Ian Lee connection, which is more strange coincidence that someone who has a credit in our film is also involved with that band.
That is so holistic, isn't it? Really,
That's
the circle is closed.
I do often say there's a lot of coincidence around the Iceman. It happens all the time. So, for example, I was really nervous about. I had a one-man show booked at Penn Theatre in London. I was a bit nervous about it. Not many people had bought tickets, and it was 100% new material. And I was early, so I just went for a walk around the block. And the building behind the club is Eskimo Ice, which is the company Anthony used to order ice blocks from back in the 90s. And it was almost like he was there to sort of say, don't worry, Rob, you're going to have a good gig. It was the strangest thing to see. Like, I was just out. It's just an industrial estate in the middle of Peckham. And just there it was, Eskimo Ice. I kind of couldn't believe what I was seeing. And this sort of thing happens all the time. And it's a bit like fans of The Fall sometimes say that Marquis Smith had some sort of psychic power because all these kind of coincidences and connections would happen around him. Whatever magic that is, I'm very convinced that the Iceman has it too.
Yeah, God, that's that sort of vibrational energy, as they used to say in the New Age. If you don't. Right, look, thank you ever so much for this. And I'll send you a copy, the interview, and then you can use it wherever you fancy. But thank you ever so much for your time. And I've really loved the film. It was amazing to watch and
Thank you
very
so
exciting.
much.
But yes, there's quite a lot of kind of niche films that I'm sort of fascinated with at the moment, which I mean, it's a conversation killer, really, isn't it? Because frankly, they're so niche, but I mean, they still amuse me. And yes, I am.
Yeah. Well, hopefully there's more people like you and I, and enough people to actually warrant more films like this,
Well,
perhaps.
there seems to be. I mean, I think there is just an interesting curiosity. I mean, we don't need another interview with Alan McGee or Bob Geldof, but I think we do need more interviews with Anthony, really.
I
So,
agree strongly. I know we're trying to wind this up, but let me just say I went to see the recent Victoria Wood documentary.
oh yes,
It's very good, and I like Victoria Wood a lot. But I just kept thinking, everyone knows about Victoria Wood. This story has been told so many times. What about the people like the Iceman? Because there's hundreds of them, hundreds.
yes,
Straight away to me, it's just far more interesting than someone who was successful, whose name is a known commodity. And as much as I love Victoria Wood and I enjoyed the documentary, there was this constant thought of, yeah, but what about Andrew Bailey? Why has no one made a film with Andrew Bailey yet? The human bingo ball man.
yes.
You know,
Absolutely, no, absolutely. I always think, well, they're all out there. And actually, one thing that has really blown my mind with all these interviews I've done is the depth of kind of commitment and work that people have put in. Because as a kid, indie kid, listen to it, I just thought people would just rock up, do the album, they'd have their 5 years. Mostly bands last for 5 years. They have the 12-month honeymoon period, a play on the John Peel show, the session, then they get the album, the tour, they get the transit van around the art centres and alternative clubs, the second album going kind of well, but things tension, and then the third, if they get that far, it all just explodes after 5 years and they all go their sort of way. And actually, what was amazing was just how much they'd spent their life putting into that 5 years and just how committed they were. It was just full on during that time. And just the depth, so there was a lot of bands I missed during that time for various reasons, mainly because you just couldn't access it through the internet. You had to physically buy a copy, and you couldn't even go to a record shop always to find them, because John Peel would play very obscure stuff. And yes, you just, it was like bands like The Sound and the Chameleons and
mhm.
Sad Giants and something like that. There were just lots of bands that I went, Jesus, I actually missed all these the first time. So I've sort of gone back and thought, my God, they really were focused and dedicated to what they were doing. It wasn't just a bit of jingly pop. It was absolutely life and death. And, they're still doing bits and pieces now. But like Anthony, they had to sort of eventually get a bit of a day job to pay some rent, because I didn't realize how little people made money. It was like, no, you really have to, yes, eventually you just can't be poor forever, really.
That's it. And also, let's face it, we're all tied to those periods and those scenes. So there's always going to be interest, isn't there? Well,
Yes.
hopefully, I don't know about the next generation, a Generation Z interested in these things. I hope they are. I hope they
I
are.
hope they are. I hope they're having their thing that they're doing, which I'll talk about later. Anyway,
Mm,
look, I'll let you groove, but thank you ever so much. This has been amazing. I'll keep in touch. But yeah,
please do.
yeah, take care.
Take
And
care,
thanks again for
David.
the film. Take care. I'll say goodbye. Bye.
Pleasure. Nice to meet you.
And that was me in a conversation with Robert Wringham talking about the film Melted, about the Iceman, Anthony Irvine. This has been the C86 show, David Eastaugh. Have a great week. Stay safe.